To build on the Florida Chamber's efforts to secure Florida's water future, I'd like to first share a short video that's helping to drive discussions on the importance of water to Florida. These videos are meant to be shared with your employees, vendors, friends, and family. We believe Florida wins when people hear directly from their employers on why issues matter.
Florida. It's blue on 3 borders, practically surrounded by water, so we can't possibly have a water problem, right? Wrong. Over 800 people move to Florida every single day, and lots of people use lots of water. In 15 years, water use will rise by almost 30% to about 9 billion gallons every day. Whether you're thinking of Blue Springs, the St. Johns River, the Everglades, Apalachicola Bay, or any of Florida's unique water resources, one thing is clear: everyone needs water. To drink, to grow food, and to make everyday products possible. Some states let their water problem become a water crisis. As people moved in, water grew scarce and prices went up. It doesn't have to be that way for Florida. Sound science, better conservation, and sensible investments in new water supplies will meet Florida's growing demand and keep water clean and affordable. Help keep Florida blue by sharing this video and learning more at floridawins.org.
Okay, this video and other short video messages on important policy issues can be found at floridawins.org. Throughout the next 2 days, I encourage you to visit with Greg with the Chamber. He's located in the atrium to learn more about how Florida Wins can help share messages like the video we just saw with your employees. Remember, when the Florida businesses win, Florida wins. And with that, I'll start with peppering the panel here with some questions, and I'll start with Chairman Caldwell. Mr. Chairman, Speaker Crisafulli and President Gardner have made updating Florida's water policies a priority for the 2015 legislative session. Why should water be a priority, and why is this the right time to tackle the issue?
I appreciate that, Dave, and I guarantee you when we set out to have this meeting today, we didn't realize we were going to consider that omnibus water policy bill on the floor this afternoon. So I'm going to have to sneak away before we finish this panel, because that starts at 4 o'clock, and these 3 capable guys, I'm sure, will be able to answer your questions at the end. But to your question, David, you just saw a good bit of it in the ad. If you look at, for example, the Central Florida Water Initiative area, the Orlando metro area, we have the supply to meet the needs of the 1 million to 2 million people that live in that broader region right now, but they're going to add another 1 million people within the immediate horizon. We don't have the water supply available to meet those needs right now, and that's just for that region a big reason why the CFWI is part of the comprehensive package we put together. And when you look at the package overall, the priorities we put together, it's not just about water supply, it's about the environment, it's about the natural systems, it's about trying to meet the needs of restoring our spring sheds, as well as the Everglades down in South Florida.
Well, Mr. Varn, I read an article in the Tampa Bay Times, an op-ed that was entitled, "Putnam Looks to Shift Oversight of State Water to His Department Away from Scott." And this article asserted that the omnibus water bill that Representative Caldwell just referenced would, quote, take enforcement powers away from what Scott controls, the state's Department of Environmental Protection and Water Management Districts. Is it accurate to state that if this bill passed, your agency would be ceding powers to the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services?
No. I'll be honest, when I read that, I kind of got flat-footed there, caught flat-footed, and so I went back and made sure that I had actually read the bill for the 19th, 20th time to make sure I hadn't missed something. But yes, no, I think that was simply inaccurate, and we'd be happy to discuss it more in detail, but yeah, that would be incorrect.
Well, Representative Caldwell, do you have any comments on that? I mean, how does this legislation advance the ball on Florida's water policies?
Well, does so in a number of ways, but I'll just build on that. The interpretation where DAX was viewed as taking over authority was just, as someone quoted me, a bizarro world interpretation of what's in the bill. In fact, the exact opposite happens in both the spring zones and in the Everglades. We're expanding oversight of best management practices to include DEP and the water management districts who haven't had an explicit statutory role in the past. When you look at the CFWI is very much focused on giving certainty to suppliers to make investments long-term in the region there in the Orlando Metro. But the other two big pieces for the spring sheds and the Everglades, we're looking to achieve a couple of things. One, uniformity in the policy structure overall. As we look to prioritize the restoration projects we need to fund out of the state budget, we need to have the information available as legislators to know what gets us the most bang for the buck. As DEP leads the process of developing those basin management action plans, that is a collaborative process. It involves all of the stakeholders, but most particularly it's going to involve DEP as the lead agency, and then DAX as the expertise on agricultural science.
So Craig, as the director of the Office of Water Policy and DEP, since one of your goals does not seem to be to give away the department's authority, what are your goals for your office in the coming year?
Well, coordination among the districts and the department would be our biggest, streamlining or making more efficient the processes and making them more in line with. A few years ago we had the CupCon process. We intend to continue that, continue reviewing all the district rules and the department's rules, ensuring that we have consistency among them. Makes it easier for the permitting process if you understand how everything happens. We'll be continuing to review budgets and just generally trying to work with and help out the districts and look at a statewide water policy.
Okay, so taking a step back then, Michael, historically Floridians have had an abundance or even a surplus of water. What has changed?
Well, as we've discussed earlier today, we're now the third most populous state. We have 100 million annual visitors that come to the state, or close to it. Jerry's predicting we're going to hit 100 million. Even with reduced per capita consumption, we've got an increasing demand, and we have lived primarily relying on groundwater as our water supply, what's relatively referred to as the cheap water, the groundwater. Our water management system is designed primarily to drain. When we were blessed with 48 to 60 inches of rain across the state on average, but rather than trying to maintain that water in the system, we drain it as rapidly as possible to the estuaries and to the ocean. This causes harm to the estuary. So it's a recipe for a lot of problems that have come about, and we're at the cusp where we need to make some critical decisions to address it, or else we won't have a sustainable water supply going forward.
Well, and you mentioned, Florida certainly has seasonal periods of abundant rainfall, much of which runs into canals and rivers and goes to tide. Do you envision the construction of new surface water reservoirs as a mean to overcome our water supply challenges?
I think surface water clearly becomes a significant part of how we address the needs for the state. It's diversification away from just purely groundwater to utilize surface water. Surface water could be stored in above ground reservoirs. It can also be stored underground in ASRs, aquifer storage and recovery. And then you also have the ability, as was done in Tampa Bay, to supplement those sources with desalinization. It's the most expensive alternative, but when you couple the three together, it creates a very reliable system. And I think we just sort of need to take a chapter from the Tampa Bay a situation where 25 to 30 years ago, they were the canary in the mine that gave us all an indication of what kind of issues we had coming up. And so our ability to address those issues, I think, was handled well in Tampa Bay, and if the rest of the state can do it without having litigation, then that's a positive.
Right, exactly. Well, and you mentioned the governance structure that was established there in the greater Tampa area. But it's more than just governance. It's also, at times, you have to build the brick and mortar water supply projects. And I'd be interested in, Phil, in hearing your thoughts on what are really the practical difficulties associated with implementing water supply development projects.
Well, thank you. What's been discussed already is the fact that, around the state we're getting restrictions or caps on development of fresh groundwater. And as Mr. Minton talked about, that is the cheapest water source. It's pretty much you can almost drink it coming right out of the ground. And what that means is that to serve this growing population, we're going to have to be looking at what is referred to as alternative water sources. And these are surface water, or brackish groundwater, or desalination of seawater. And the issue with these sources is they're more expensive to treat. It's a more complicated treatment system to be able to turn the water into what we call potable, something you can drink. And it's more expensive to operate. Also, these sources are typically, where you would develop surface water, it's not necessarily right next to where you need the water. So in addition to more expensive treatment processes, you're looking at longer pipelines, and that adds to the cost of the projects. And what needs to happen typically to implement these types of projects is you need regional partnerships. And the regional partnerships can be somewhat difficult to put together or get negotiations done, because you have a lot of issues you have to address. It's of the entities cooperating. Who's going to be in charge? Or who's going to be responsible for actually treating the water and delivering it to the other partners? How much of the total cost is each entity going to have to pay to develop the project? And how much of the quantity that can be developed from the alternative water source goes to each of the partners? And a lot of times these are, as I mentioned, real difficult negotiations. Can take a number of years in some cases to actually negotiate these terms. But the good news is we do have some good models that have worked for regional partnership. Mr. Minton touched on, in the Tampa Bay area, there's Tampa Bay Water that actually was created out of a big emergency, but yet the state came through with some incentive packages to kind of facilitate the forming of the partnership, to get it going, to develop these diverse alternative water sources. So these are kind of some of the things you need to look at in order to put them together.
Well, and you mentioned, we've really spent much of our time talking about water supply issues. There's water quality challenges also to be addressed, and one of them is the state has literally millions of septic tanks, and many of these systems are in rural areas and serve homeowners and small communities well, but there are some areas of the states where it's highly developed and there's cluster developments on septic tanks, and local surface waters are impaired by nutrient pollution. Some scientific information seems to indicate that septic tanks may be among the causes of those pollution problems. Phil, why do you think it's so difficult for our state, local government, and individual homeowners to tackle the issue of septic tanks where there appears to be a need for some type of increased treatment?
Well, there's a couple of main issues, and in my opinion. One is it's not always easy to prove a causality or a connection between septic tanks and an impairment of a water body, because the geology is different around the state. Certainly in some areas, it has been proven that's a direct connection. If you find these markers that are tagged to human wastewater and only are in human wastewater, that would prove a causality. So I think that's one of the first key issues is it's not always easy to prove the causality between septic tanks and degradation of a water body. The second issue, which is also very big, is that there's a large cost. And typically when a government goes into sewering an area, and so in other words, there's a septic tank area and you want to connect them to a centralized wastewater treatment facility, the cost is typically borne by each individual homeowner that's getting rid of the septic tank. And that cost can range from $10,000 to over $20,000 a homeowner. And as you can imagine, that can be a kind of a politically charged type scenario, you know, when various homeowners will have an assessment, you know, of that magnitude. So those are kind of the two key issues I see.
Well, last session, the Florida legislature passed Senate Bill 536, and this legislation directs DEP to conduct a study on the expansion of the beneficial use of reclaimed water, stormwater, and excess surface water, and to submit a report based upon the study by the end of this year. Craig, what's the status of that study process, and can you provide a sneak preview of some of the recommendations that you expect to be contained in the report?
Well, I'm happy to report through no work of my own that it is moving along at a fairly good pace. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, so we should have no problem getting something out a little bit early for review and everybody to discuss. But it's hard to, with anything like that, and the deadline's not till the end of the year, so we still have plenty of time, so it's still a fluid process. But I think you can feel certain there'll be discussions on aquifer recharge and ASR options, looking at regulatory change to ASR and aquifer recharge that would help not necessarily change, but clarify historic issues that we've seen. Looking at maybe public outreach, explanation, description to deal with some of these issues. And then stormwater, beneficial uses of stormwater. We have such a large amount of stormwater, and sometimes it frankly goes to waste. Ability to use that, we're coming up with some thoughts, and obviously been working with a lot of the industries to discuss those, including DOT, because as you know, they have quite a few of those ponds. So that's kind of what we're, you know, but it, as I said, it's fluid, so I wouldn't guarantee, but that's something you can hopefully expect.
Okay, well, and Representative Caldwell, before you go back and vote on the, or consider the omnibus water bill, the comprehensive water policy that you're shepherding through the process, you know, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the Senate also has some legislation that's been introduced that touches on some of the same topics, touches on springs, and also on a state advisory council for reviewing water projects and recommending funding. So it addresses some of the same issues, touches a couple of the same similar topics that your legislation does, but it's also, the details are notably different. I'd be interested in how you would characterize the discussions between the House and the Senate here in just the second day of session about adopting the right approaches to address our water supply challenges.
Well, as with every piece of legislation, each chamber equally represents the sovereignty of our 19 million citizens. So, you know, their decisions and thoughts are just as wise as the ones we come up with in the House, obviously. That was the laugh line. That's right. No, I don't think there actually is a strong conflict. Obviously, their bill is much more project focused and oriented. Our bill is extremely process focused, expanding the uniformity of the BMAP process throughout the state, as well as the implementation of best management practices in any of those impaired water bodies. That's really a process approach, and they have some real specific projects and remedies they'd like to pursue. Where they're not in conflict, I'm eager to try to just incorporate them as best we can, and where they are, well, we'll work it out like we do with everything. But I'm an optimist. I think, you know, hopefully we'll have the bill pass off the floor tomorrow and into the Senate's hands in the first week, and that'll give us plenty of time to negotiate where we'd like to end up as a legislature by the end of the session.
Very good. Well, I'm certainly an optimist as well, and I'd be interested in the other panelists' thoughts as we wrap up and close here and let everyone go do their legislative duties. So first, I'll turn it to Michael and then go down the panel. But Michael, do you think we should be optimistic about Florida's ability to continue its positive economic growth over the next 20 years and still maintain the clean and abundant water to serve the public?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. One, we have a leadership. Representative Caldwell is part of that leadership, but we have leadership both the House and the Senate that have made a commitment to address the water issues, and you have a governor and a cabinet that's very strongly supportive of addressing these issues. We have foresight, and hopefully we'll have the ability to address it and not kick the can down the road. We're at a point now where we can do some very positive things before we get into the crisis situation that Tampa Bay found itself in. I sit on the solutions team for Central Florida Water Initiative. The representative mentioned it. And to sort of put it in perspective, we currently consume about 800 million gallons a day in the greater Orlando area. And we believe there's about 850 million gallons a day that can be used from groundwater. We currently have permitted 1 billion gallons a day to withdraw, and we anticipate in the next 20 years we're going to need 1.1 billion gallons a day. So we are at the cusp of having some real issues with sustainability, but we have the ability to address it as long as we address it now. Use science-based resolution and then have the financial commitment to implement it.
Sure. Craig, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think that was very well said. Yes.
Phil?
Well, I'm optimistic that we can solve this issue. It's, 20 years ago, we weren't talking like we are today about the challenge that we were going to have to face with, the previous 6 million people that came here. So I think we have a good dialogue going on right now. We have processes in place where these issues are actively being addressed, and these alternative water sources, we know how to treat them, we know how to make them potable, and it's just a matter of figuring out what are the right regional partnerships to be able to develop the most cost-effective type projects.
Right. Certainly there's opportunities for reuse. Reclaimed water can be a good source of water, and there are some energy projects are more water intensive than others, so that's certainly part of it. I think one thing that the initial video that you saw did a real nice job of demonstrating is that water it's not just about turning on the faucet and having water come out, that water's a critical element of our agricultural industry we have here in the state, and also for essential infrastructure, electric power generation, that in order to sustain our economic growth, we're going to need water for all those uses, and we're all in it together. And certainly the Chamber is doing an admirable job stepping up and taking a leadership role on these issues. And please thank our sponsor, Hopping Green and Sam's, and visit with Greg at the FloridaWinds.org exhibit, or visit the Business Center sponsored by Florida Power and Light on the first floor in room 115. So thank you very much.